Hi, I'm Steve Sherman, creator of Power of Process. Many of you have seen a number of interviews that I've done with the photographers that I've had the good fortune to meet over the years and in the fine art black and white genre of photography. This is probably one of the most important interviews to me personally with my friend, my traveling partner, and ultimately my mentor, Jack Holowitz. So Jack, this is kind of a thrill for me to be at this point, 35 years after we met, where certainly your resume is world-class resume, without question. Jack and I met in a professional photography association in Connecticut, 1981. I obviously had no knowledge of photography at that point in time, but it grew over time, and I was fortunate enough to meet some very good friends, Jack and his wife Nancy being one. And as it happens, these friends that I met back in the early 80s are now my lifelong friends. They're the closest friends I have. So it's really a treat to have an opportunity here at a show that Jack has in Springfield, Massachusetts. There's 70-some prints on the wall. We're going to talk to Jack about at least 3 or 4 of the different images and what the thought process was that went into him choosing to make that image. So I'm really looking forward to getting this thing going. Jack, I remember you telling a story when you worked for Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. You had a big 8x10 camera, and part of your job was to record different parts, different machine parts, and whether they were stressed or broken or some type of damage was occurring. And fill in our viewers on that story.
Well, back in that day, they went to 8x10 cameras and black and white film because every photograph we made they needed 30, 40, 50 copies of it. And it was easier just to set up a contact printer for 8x10 and then kind of mask with tissue paper, do your dodging and burning with tissue paper on a sheet of glass between the light source and where the negative was. So once you got that done, you could whip off 30 or 40 prints in a minute or two. And then they had big tubs for developing, and you just throw the 30 sheets in there and start flipping them like you were shuffling cards. And you got a lot of work out.
Wasn't there a story where your boss came by and wanted to know why there was this 30-minute exposure, why this particular coworker was fairly still in that particular part of the picture?
Yeah, that wasn't at Pratt & Whitney. The first place I worked was up in Burlington, Vermont, and the studio I worked for had a contract to do construction shots every week, go and do the same thing over to show the progress. And the foreman knew that we were doing long exposures, like 2 or 3 minutes. And it wasn't a problem with people walking through because they didn't even record.
Right.
There was this one negative we made, and the foreman looked at the print and he said, "What's this guy doing? He's sharp." And the guy was just leaning back against a post or a beam or whatever it was, and he didn't move for 2 or 3 minutes. He said,
taking a nap.
Yeah, he said, "I want to know who that guy was." So probably got him in trouble. But yeah, a lot of funny things. Well, since we've been traveling together, things happen almost every trip.
There are some funny stories that we could look back upon. Excuse me, the kind of thing that you had to kind of be there to actually appreciate the whole expanse of the story. But there was one time when both Jack and I were in the Pacific Northwest in the rainforest, and it's called the rainforest for a very specific reason, because it constantly rains. But that didn't deter two serious photographers. We went out and made some images during the rain in the rainforest. And consequently, our lenses and cameras and everything were soaked. So we both found our way into the men's room, and we'd taken our lenses apart, and we constantly were hitting the hand dryer, the air dryer, to to dry out our lenses. Finally, it must have tipped off the park ranger, because the park ranger actually came in, was wondering, what's going on here? I'm hearing this hand dryer going on and off all the time.
Yeah, he thought it was probably stuck on, and I don't know what he thought, but he kind of chuckled and left us alone.
Right. And almost every trip we had, we would try to seek out a motel that didn't have windows in the bathroom, so that we could change film at night, load film, put it away, and load new sheets of film. So consequently, we wouldn't get in until after dark.
Right.
We'd have a meal, and we'd go search out a motel, and we'd walk in, and right after we found out whether they had a vacancy, the next question was, two older men, do you have windows in the bathroom? And that always brought a strange look.
Oh, yeah.
But nevertheless, so we told them that we were photographers, and they may or may not have believed us, but they left us alone for that part of the night. But.
Remember at one point we were in Utah, and it was getting dark, and we had no place to stay. And we called ahead to a motel that was maybe 30 miles away from where we were. And, out in the country, and I think you asked them if they wanted a credit card to hold the room. They said, nah, we trust you. We know you're coming.
There is that story about the package store in California
on
a Sunday. Wow.
That's... Yeah, they never closed. 9, 10 o'clock Sunday night, we could buy a 6-pack.
We pulled in, obviously being the junior member of this whole thing, not being as worldly as Jack, we pulled into I think it was Big Pine,
yes,
California, on a Sunday night, as Jack said. Get to the package store, it's 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I went in to get some adult beverages, and I asked the woman in the package store behind the counter, I said, what time you folks close? And she says, 1 or 2, somewhere around there. And I looked at her, being from Connecticut, I looked at her kind of funny, and I said, well, you don't have a definite time to close? No. So foolishly on my part, I decided to ask her if they were open on Election Day, because in Connecticut, liquor stores are closed on Election Day. She looked at me even more strangely when I asked her if the package stores were open on Election Day, and she just said, yeah, of course we're open. And she says, if you don't know who you want to vote for by the time Election Day gets here, what's the sense of us closing?
And then she said, doesn't sound like Connecticut's too good a place to live.
Yeah, she did say that. Of course, then there's the Dunkin' Donuts story in Maine, but that's...
Yeah, we could go on.
Yeah, we could go on. But let's try to key in on some of your portrait work and also your landscape work. I'm eager to hear some of the backstories that you'll be able to share with us.
Okay, great.
So Jack, we're here with a portrait. I know that you've made your mark in the world of photography doing portraits, specifically darker background portraits of men. This is a portrait that I've always admired. Just sitting here now looking at the lighting, it just looks so lifelike. You can see the pores in his skin. And can you talk a little bit about the lighting and talk a little bit about the posing that went into this?
Sure. This is a friend of ours. His name is Jay Stock, and he's a photographer from the Ohio and Pennsylvania region. And he started his working as a coal miner in Pennsylvania. And you can see by his hands, they're working man's hands. And he went into photography, and he's become a very good friend. And he came to Springfield, and my studio used to be right behind the house in the backyard. So we were eating or talking or having a drink or something, and I just said, Jay, let's go out in the studio and try messing around. We probably both had a drink or two by then. And
that's a good thing, though, right?
Yeah, loosens everything up. And this is the type portraiture I used to do for clients. Like Steve said, dark background, darker clothes, so that the face actually feels like it's coming off the paper. And this was 5x7 film, probably Tri-X at the time, developed in D76, not D70, HC110. I forgot what they called it. The lighting was just typical. It was a smaller light source. If I remember right, it might have been like a 14-inch umbrella, and then fill lights. And I like to work with kickers from behind to highlight the hair, to highlight the little side of the cheek, the way the light's brushing across his back of his fingers and his knuckles. Everything to give a third dimension to a portrait that is actually a two-dimension piece of art. The lights that just move around just make it look like it has more dimension, almost a 3D look. And he was a good subject. I loved his face. And the pose, it's just something he moved into. I don't try to direct people's poses that much. I'm more just watching them, and when they do something, I'll just say, freeze that for a minute. And with the 5x7 camera, it takes a little while to focus, but, you know, it's not that hard to do.
So many interesting things that I think we should be pointed out here. Prior to knowing Jack and being involved with the professional organization, I had no idea what a kicker light was, but it's a light that comes in from behind the subject that causes this glancing light. But what I think the audience should also key in on here is just the mask of the face is sharp. So Jack has focused this camera almost wide open so that the only sharp part is the hand and the mask of the face. And if you look closely, just beyond the mask of his face, it drops off in focus quite abruptly. And I don't even know, I hope I'm not doing you a disservice here, but they actually have a function in Photoshop now that will do something like this.
Yes.
But there's so few photographers nowadays that even know how to do this technique that is done with a camera and film and light. It's a testament to your expertise, but it's also a sad commentary on what computers have been able to do.
The way I learned portraiture, this is the way it's done. You focus on the eyes and the mask of the face and let everything else behind it fall out of focus. It also contributes to the depth, the look of depth and roundness and a third dimension almost. If everything was sharp, back to his ears and the hair coming out the back of his neck, it would, I don't know. To me, it just wouldn't look right.
It takes away from the soul of the photograph, I think. It's a remarkable portrait.
This is pretty much what we did for our living for all the 50-some years I've been in business. Like I said, I've known Jay for a long time, and I've always thought his face was great. And when I had got a chance to get him in the studio, I just went for it. And he's been photographed before, and Jay is a real character. He has that little impish look in his eye and the little smile. In most of my work, and including client work, I'm not a big one for getting big smiley faces. Somebody told me many, many years ago, and this was an artist, not a photographer, they say people get tired of looking at a big grin hanging on their wall. If you could get a little look in the eye that maybe the person is thinking something or feeling something, you could hang it forever and you never get tired of looking at it. And also, if you have the subject look into the camera, into the lens, as you walk across in front of this picture, those eyes are going to follow you. And I've always kind of liked that idea too. As far as the mask of the face, this is how I learned. And if you go to a museum and look at portraits by pretty well-known painters, you'll see again that if they're doing a face painting, the focus falls off towards the back of it. As I'm looking closer at this, I think the front of his nose is even going a little unsharp, which is fine. Everybody knows it's a nose. He's still around and kicking. I think he's still photographing too. This man never quits. He has, in his home, he has a home studio, and his basement is all darkroom and storage space. He has print boxes stacked up to the ceiling almost in every room. He's a very prolific photographer, or printer. I can never spend that much time printing. But I think this captured him. That pretty much looks the way I think he looks.
So we're back again, and we have a different portrait that Jack has made. Memory serves me, this is an older portrait. I know I've always admired it, and I can't help but wonder if I formulated some of my own aesthetic in that. In my work, I tend to like, obviously, a center of interest, but I also like other ancillary areas of interest, but I never like an even number of things to look at. I like an odd number. In this case, there's three things. Now, certainly this is a technical challenge to pull this off, but can you speak to the obviously the shape up in the corner, the lamp and the model? It's just a magnificent arrangement.
Yes, well, like Steve, I like things in odd numbers, and I think I'd rearranged this a little, maybe moved the couch, moved the lamp a little to get that triangle. So the eye goes either from here to here to here and back again, or whichever way your eye wants to go. The eye moves around and it ends up on her face. This was a little bit of a challenge because this room was very dark. Now this is a location portrait. This wasn't done in the studio. It's done in her home. The light source was a window behind me, behind the camera, and there wasn't much light coming through it. This exposure, again on 5x7 film, this exposure was about 7 or 8 seconds. And the reason I have her lying is because I knew that if there's something supporting a person, or a head or arms, they can be very still for quite a few seconds. The challenge was for me to get enough exposure in that darker light to get detail in her hair and detail under here and detail in the dark areas. I have to give that long an exposure. But I also knew that with that exposure, this light, especially where the light is hitting the wall and the top of the lamp, was going to just blare out. It was just going to be a big white spot. So then I decided to do the longer exposure, but instead of developing normally, I gave this what you call about a normal -3 development. And what that does, it just doesn't let the highlight grow as bright. It just brings the contrast closer. So I could keep the detail in the darks. And another trick I used is I did a little flashing on the paper right under the light, right where it was hitting the white top of the lamp. Mm-hmm. And by flashing, it just and this is just raw light, no negative involved. And all it does is puts a little exposure into the paper so that now the first detail coming through the negative starts to form the image. So it was a combination of carefully exposing and just manipulating the developer to hold the contrast back. And the flashing was just another tool we used to help that out. And I think it worked out pretty good. It's not a hard negative to print. The flashing, every time I make it, is kind of a problem. But you get used to that too.
Well, I think it's an excellent rendition of a technical challenge. And I know you've heard me say this in videos about Hartford City Hall. I'm sure when you go into this room, if you were to see this setup, it's nowhere near as contrasty as Jack alluded to with a dark background. But as far as the film sees, that wall is essentially black, and her blouse and the lamp is white. So it was Jack's challenge, and he was successful in compressing that tremendous amount of contrast because of the technical knowledge that he has. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts of film photography, when you can control those types of things. So thank you, Jack, for sharing that with us. It's a beautiful portrait.
It's been one of my favorites over the years. Nude on the rocks.
So we're back again, and I should share with you folks that leading up to this, I did a little bit of prep work, and I had 3 or 4 or 5 images that I wanted to talk with Jack about. And when I came in the gallery, I looked at 70-some different images, and boy, I'd like to talk about almost all of them. But this one in particular, I had not had on my radar, but when I saw it, all the memories of how this came about came back to me. And I just wanted to ask Jack about it because Jack and I were out in Jerome, Arizona, and we were out there doing a workshop, and one of the fellows asked us to come back to his place. We were going to buy some film and whatnot. So anyway, this fellow had arranged to set up a couple of models for Jack to do some figure work. But this particular image that you see here is done at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the blazing sun, and there was just this little tiny pocket of this rock wall that was in shadow. Everything else was this blazing sun, the worst time of day for a film photographer to expose film. Yet Jack saw this image, saw the opportunity, and I was just standing far back, and I just watched this whole thing unfold. So can you talk a little bit about how your mind immediately got to this amazing portrait?
Sure. Like you said, sunlight is not good, especially if there are people involved. If you're doing portraits, you definitely try to stay out of sunlight. If you can't, you try to backlight, because as soon as the sun hits the face, you get shadows, you get eye squinting, you pick up every wrinkle in a face if there's sunlight on it. But this, like Steve said, there was this little pocket in this wall that was in the shade. There was probably another piece of rock over there shading this. And when I work outside or in the landscape with a figure or with a person, if I'm doing a portrait, I find the picture I want of the scene, of the landscape, without the model in it or without a subject in it. And I set up on that, and then I find a way to place the subject after the fact. So I framed that background before the figure was ever in it. And once I got that in focus and everything, I had her get up there. If I remember, this sledge was enough off the ground that she had to have help getting in there. But
yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, everything worked out. I got the background that has a little character in it and a little texture, and the skin's so soft that it was easy to just get a really nice smooth look. I try to make a nude figure looks like it's lit from the inside, like maybe a piece of china that has a light in it, and you can see almost through it. The problems with a shot like this is she had such fair, light skin, but very, very dark hair. So again, I don't like to see masses of dead black with no detail in it in the picture. This was also done on 5x7 film. It's probably my standard size to work with when we're traveling or hiking, because it fits in a backpack, and it's good for contact prints, and it's also good enlarged. But I have to figure the exposure to get detail in her hair. The first thing I look at when I look at something like this is the darkest part in the image, in the scene, and I set my exposure by that. So I exposed to get maybe zone 3, 3.5 in the hair, which made the body go a little higher than I would like to have. So again, I did a little bit of a minus development just to hold the highlight of the body back. And again, I got a negative that is fairly easy to print. I have good tones in the rocks. I have some detail in her hair, not as much as I would have liked, but I do have detail in there. If I were to print this again, I would probably do what they call chalking on the negative, which is taking a dark graphite and putting the negative together with a piece of frosted plastic and actually painting the dark charcoal onto the negative or onto the backing. It's like dodging, except it's more precise. You don't have to get in there during the exposure with a wand and hold that back. And then if you make multiple prints of this, they're all consistent. So, you know, there's a lot of techniques. I've been printing for probably 50-some years now in the darkroom, and you pick up one or two little tricks in that time.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Well, I found your explanation very insightful in that I wouldn't have thought to approach it where I would set up the outer part or the landscape portion of the photograph and then introduce the model, but it makes all the sense in the world. And thank you for that tip.
Oh, my pleasure. Now, I found early on that working in the landscape, you have to look at both things as separate images. And the one that can't be moved is the one I start with.
It makes all the sense in the world. This is a print that I knew that I wanted to talk about, and the reason I wanted to talk about it and get Jack's thoughts about it were we were together when we did this, but not more importantly, this is not what it looks like in reality. So, and you know, I've said years ago that because photography is a photomechanical process and people equate it with newspaper and whatnot, I think there's a general perception by the general public that if they were there at that point in time and they had our knowledge, they could replicate this print. And that's the furthest thing from reality that there is. So Jack, could you talk a little bit about how you got these tonalities to be quite a bit different than what they are in reality?
Sure. This is a plant that grows in swampy areas. We found it mostly in Vermont. We make a trip. This plant gets to this point about the first week of May. In reality, this plant is a pretty medium shade of green. I'm sorry. But I knew when I was looking at this, I wanted to get it to look high key. So the plant also, it's a very fast growing plant. You have to get to there at the right time, and then it's just like ground cover. All you're doing is walking and looking straight down to see a composition. A week from this, it looks like corn stalks. It grows that fast.
That's a good point. It elevates.
Yeah, so you have to be up there when it's at this level. Probably a day or two later, you wouldn't get shots like this. Well, I knew I wanted to make it high key. So again, I knew I would have to take my meter reading and physically give it more time because the reflected light meter wants to record everything as an 18% gray. So what I did, I took my exposure meter reading and gave it 3 stops more exposure, knowing that that was going to boost the tones up into the upper part of the film base. The other trick I have when I'm working with green plants is I use a green filter, because in black and white photography, a filter color will lighten its own color in the scene. So a green filter will lighten green. And the combination of the more exposure and the green filter, I got a negative that very nicely likes to print as a high key print.
Beautiful composition. Once again, there's that one main focus of of interest, but then there's other little areas that also add interest to the image. It's wonderful, wonderful photograph.
It's with this plant, timing is everything. You have to be there when it's ready to go.
Yeah.
And we've been lucky. We don't get up there every year, but we've been up there several times that first week of May. And sure as anything, they're there.
Well, one of the problems is Mother's Day is many times that weekend. So, give
her a print.
That's a terrific image, Jack. I'd like to highlight one last one that's kind of in a direct contrast with what you see here, but I think it'll be a rewarding experience nevertheless. So this is the last shot that I want to talk to Jack about this evening, and I want to get his thoughts on what went into his thought process as to choose this particular photograph, and I'd like to share my own thoughts after I hear Jack's thoughts. I have not seen this photograph prior to walking in the gallery tonight, so I'm eager to hear your thoughts, Jack.
Well, this location, this print happens to be on loan for this gallery showing for my grandson, who is the one that took me to this place. This is a back wall of a paint store where people that do painting like this buy their supplies. So it turned out that the back of the store was blank, and the owner said, you know, why don't you guys just go out and use this wall? So these things are maybe there for 2 or 3 weeks. Then the next person comes along and just kind of wipes this one out and paints over it with his own designs. So once, to back up a little bit, this negative size is 12 by 20 inches. This is what they call a contact print, where the print is the same size as the negative. It's not enlarged at all, and it's a big, awkward camera to use. But this kind of a subject is ideal because it doesn't keep running out of the frame, and you have all the time in the world to set up. Mm-hmm. And when you get behind a camera, you're looking at a ground glass that is this size. So you have to keep walking back and forth to make sure this side is sharp and this side is sharp. And, you know, it's kind of hard to compose on this. But because it doesn't move, and again, you have all the time in the world, you can do that with the bigger cameras. I work with all formats. I work with everything up to the 12 by 20 inch. So it depends on how far I have to walk as to which camera I take. I wouldn't hike very far with this camera. It's a monster, and it's very heavy, and the tripod's very heavy. But I just like the tones. I like the shape of it. You know, it almost looks like a funky tree, this being the trunk and this being the branches. And this is actually somebody's name. And it's a funny story. My grandson said the name here is Zeus. And I've looked at this for years, and I can't see that. And everybody else that looks at it can't see how that name came from. Well, I was doing an outdoor show in Springfield, and it was a street fair, and I had my little 10 by 10 tent set up, and this was hanging. And this guy came bopping up the street, and he looked at this and said, "Hey, Zeus." And I'm thinking, you're kidding me. But yeah, I just like the tonal range. The beauty of the big camera is the shades, the gradation of tones you can get on that negative that I don't think you can match with a smaller film or digital.
I wholeheartedly agree. And if you could see, I know the video probably won't translate to this, but if you could see the texture in that wall, it's like it's lifelike. Like you could reach out and touch it right here. But some of the things that strike me about this, obviously, here's your center of interest right here. But then you have these secondary points of interest that I used to call these things, especially something like this and like this, I would call those things points of tension. That was 20 years ago when I didn't have the knowledge that maybe I do now. But I came across a fellow that we both know and respect, and he told me, he says, your vision will mature, Steve. Jay Dussard.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've now come to understand something like that I would have said years ago as a point of tension. Now it adds mystery to the whole image, and your mind wants to know what else is in that image. But I think it's just perfectly placed in that it doesn't dominate the photograph very much, but yet it's there. And at least for me, I want to go to this particular place and see what the rest of it looks like. But the tonalities, Jack, are just striking. And I'll say one other thing. In film photography, it would be very easy to print this with a lot more contrast than Jack has chosen here. And I think, and I certainly don't want to, insult's not the right word, but I have seen over the years where newer beginning photographers react more with the higher contrast type things. There's something that jumps out at them. But I think as you mature, I know that you and I have both matured in black and white photography, and we have grown to appreciate these more subtle tonalities that, you know, a real film photographer understands that they're just not that easy to accomplish.
Well, you know, the scene has a black in it, it has a white in it, and it has every shade in between. And if you overprint it or print it too contrasty, you're going to lose a lot of these delicate, subtle gradation changes between the grays and the blacks and the whites. So you have to be kind of careful that you don't get to a point where, because you want something else to look stronger, you're losing other parts of the print, mainly the whites. So there's a balance, and you know, I've got everything from white to black in here and everything in between. So thanks to the big film, it works.
It does. Well, thank you very much, Jack. This has been very, very exciting and insightful for me, and hopefully the viewers as well. I know Jack would not take it upon himself to say this, but you know, if there's any of you out there that know of a gallery or even a museum setting, I know my blog goes worldwide. Please contact me through the blog, and you'll be able to. I can put you in touch with Jack. It's a magnificent show. It's actually called the Retrospective. Jack alluded to 60-some years that he's been in photography. So, thanks, folks, for watching. Stay tuned for more power process tips.
I appreciate you asking me to be a part of this. It's been fun.
Well, you've had a huge impact on my evolution as a black and white photographer. So
I'm glad to say that. I don't think of myself as being that noble a person, but you know, I'm just your basic working slug that has learned a few things over the years.
That's the way I look at it too. I'm very surprised as to the point I've gotten to, and I think it's just a function of being passionate about something.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any gift at all. It's just
the trick is
passion.
just spending the time in the darkroom.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Jack. This has been a treat.
Thank you.